Let's go ahead and dive into the first topic we're supposed to talk about here.
Okay.
Community. You know, obviously we've been talking about Techstars, and I'm positive one of the most valuable things entrepreneurs get there is a community.
Yeah.
But could you tell us a little bit about you and any communities that you've been a part of that have helped you in your career?
Yeah, well, so there have been many, many, many. So, you know, one of the things I think is most important about entrepreneurship is the building of an entrepreneurial community. And I think one of the great things about this time in the world is that there's an ability to build community in lots of different ways. I will answer your question eventually. But I want to sort of put in
Please.
this PSA, which because I think it's really important. One of the things that I've really enjoyed in my career is that I've been able to work with entrepreneurs all over the world and in all sorts of different communities around the country and around the world. And one of the things that's great about this time in the world is that you can create that community in a virtual sense a lot of different ways. So you're no longer necessarily isolated based on geography. And so while, of course, there's a lot of entrepreneurial activity, for example, going on in Silicon Valley, one of the reasons that Silicon Valley is no longer the only place that you can start a business is because there are lots of other entrepreneurial communities and there are lots of other ways to engage with the broader entrepreneurial community around the country and around the world. That used to not be as much the case, which is why entrepreneurial activity centered around Silicon Valley, centered around the 495 Loop in Boston, because it made sense for people to be together and they could get together face to face and talk about the problems that they were having. And that is very important still, but there are lots of other ways to do that. So I'm on Skype all the time with entrepreneurs, again, around the country, around the globe, or on email answering questions. I love that about the time in which we live, and it's really led to this sort of renaissance, if you will, of entrepreneurship, and in particular, kind of the democratization of entrepreneurship, which is that you no longer need to be Stanford educated in the Valley to say, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. You can be an entrepreneur all over the place, and I think that that's from my perspective, that's a transformational force around the globe. It's the most exciting thing about being a part of the entrepreneurial activity that's going on right now.
So I gotta ask a little bit more about that, because I think now is one of the best times to launch a business.
Sure.
Now, because Business Insider, I read an article that said that by 2020, 40% of the American workforce won't have traditional work. Like, isn't it a great time to start a business?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're sitting here talking today. It's August 24th. And the stock market's been down. It's been down for a couple of days, and I think people start to get nervous about that. One of the things to remember is, hopefully this won't be a sustained downturn. I mean, maybe by the time the Shakers are actually listening to this, it'll be whatever. It'll all have been righted. But one of the things that people forget is actually one of the best times to start a business is when the economy's down a little bit, right? And so when you think of great companies that were founded in downturns, you go down the list, and it's companies like Microsoft and Cisco way back, but it's also companies like Zynga and Uber, et cetera, from sort of the 2008 time period, right? These are actually great times to start a business. So I believe that the nature of the U.S. workforce is, and the global workforce for that matter, but the U.S. workforce is changing, and that more and more people, and already small businesses account for the vast majority of employment in the U.S. The nature of that employment is changing. We're having this, I think, a healthy discussion in the U.S. about what does that mean, right? Am I an employee or am I a contractor to you, for example? And that's important in this sort of service economy. And But I think, however that debate ends up coming out, I think the nature of work will change for much of the population over the next 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, I bet so, with technology trends.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think about, it's funny. So I had this experience the other day, for reasons it's not worth getting into, but Verizon managed to completely brick my phone. And so, I go on vacation, I turn my phone off, so it's not like I can't live without my phone, but this was the first time I can think of in 15 years, maybe more, that I had been sort of in a work day, and it ended up being 2 days, where I was completely without a phone.
Jeez.
And I had not planned for it. So I had, I scheduled back to back, and I had meetings and things I was driving to, and I had no phone, right? I couldn't call anyone. I couldn't. It was horrible. Not on the top of that, my daughters were both starting middle school too, and so it was, I was trying to coordinate things with my wife and phone calls for work, and just the being able to respond to a handful of emails.
Yeah.
And I sat back at the end of that 2-day experience and was like, wow. I mean, of course, if you had asked me, is technology important or is your mobile phone important, I would have said, sure, it's really important. But, go drop your phone in a lake for 2 days. And it really drove home for me how important that technology is for me, and just how transformational it is. I do so much on my phone from Voxer and Slack to communicate with my portfolio CEOs to phone and email, and I'd get to the end of the day with 300 emails because I just hadn't been next to my phone, and those 10 or 15 minutes here and there going from one meeting to another to clear some of that out or see what was going on, and it was just I had 20 voicemail messages. It was just crazy. So anyway, technology, that's a long way of saying technology is very important but transformational.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the efficiencies that we're allowed to indulge in 2015 are great and allow us to do so much more. And I can imagine that without 2 days. What a great story. And I'd like to highlight a point there, Shakers. When you're seeking advice from mentors or getting feedback from experts, keep it short. People are on their phones, and it allows you to respond when you previously might not have been able to respond.
Yeah.
So it's just great that you have your phone back.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have it back.
Yeah.
Exactly. Only took me another 2 days to rebuild it, of course, because amongst other things, Verizon sent me a brand new phone, which is nice of them.
Yeah.
Although it was their fault that they messed up my last phone. But even this morning, I went to dial into a conference call, and I used this app called Mobile Day, which is a founder portfolio company. I went to open Mobile Day, and I guess I just didn't have anything on Friday, which is the day I got my phone back, and of course I wasn't authenticated into it because you've got to re-auth into everything, and so it's going to be days before it all gets kind of back up and running. Exactly,
big time.
Yeah.
Wow. So,
but I think you made a good point to Shakers about sort of how to engage. But the other thing I would say, because a lot of people ask me, hey, what's the right way to reach out to people that are on in my type of position in venture, and that is to keep it relevant, right? I mean I generally respond to every thoughtful email that's sent to me, but I don't respond to every email that's sent to me. I just don't have time.
Yeah.
And so when someone takes the time to read my blog or look at our website or whatever it is and send me an email that asks something, one, asks something very specific, and two, is relevant somehow, then it makes me feel like, hey, they invested some time. I'll invest a little bit of time back, right? Even if sometimes it takes me a few weeks because I kind of pile them up and then I'm on an airplane and I kind of push all through them, but those are the ones that I email back, right? The people that have no context, that are just trying to take. I sometimes I email them back if I happen to have a few minutes, but mostly I just hit archive, and I don't have time.
So I have a question, and then we should probably get back to community. We're supposed to, but I got to ask you.
I didn't actually answer your community question either, did I?
Well, I answered, but first I got to ask you, what do you do? What does someone of your caliber use to manage email? Like there's SaneBox, Boomerang, what do you use?
Yeah, so, I do use SaneBox. I like that because that very easy, especially because I'm on my mobile a lot. That's actually the biggest advantage for me is that SaneBox does a really good job once I trained it of having the important emails. And for me, it was better than Google Priority Inbox. My important emails end up in my actual inbox, right? And then everything else gets put into a couple of other inboxes. And I can go through those relatively quickly at a later date, but I don't have to parse through a whole bunch of emails in my inbox and decide what's important. So I use that. I do use Boomerang, and I'll admit it to the Shakers. I sometimes use it because I try to kind of keep my inbox, or all my inboxes relatively clean, but I sometimes don't want to respond immediately because I find that when I respond immediately, people think that's an invitation to get into an actual conversation about something. And so I do sometimes use Boomerang to schedule later, or obviously I use it sometimes when I think, I'm not going to have time to deal with this, but I'd like to get it somewhere else. I'll have it resurface it to me if I haven't, if I haven't dealt with it in a period of time. But the important thing is I've found that, so email is really critical, but I find that I'm using two things, Voxer and Slack a lot. And I find that those are really helpful for communications within my partnership. We use Slack almost exclusively now for that because Slack does a good job of kind of knowing where I am, and it's just a lot easier to use. And then Voxer, I don't know if you know, it's sort of they call it a walkie-talkie app. It's really more like a voicemail app. I found it a very effective way to catch up with people. For me, particularly when I'm driving, I've got about a 15, 20-minute drive to my house. It's just a great way at the end of the day to just do a data dump to someone. Hey, I saw this thing, just want to make sure you saw it. Or someone kind of giving me information and then me giving it back to them. And that's primarily, for me, I use that with my portfolio executives and some co-investors. Yeah. So, part of being efficient on email is using other technology to pull things out of email. And part of it is just using email efficiently.
Wow. Cutting edge technology shakers. So let's see. We had Slack, Voxer, SaneBox, and Boomerang shakers. Check out all of those. And I'll take a second just to highlight SaneBox. SaneBox is an email tool that allows you to, it trains your important emails to stay in your inbox, and it moves the lower priority emails into the Sane Later folder, right? And you can train it. If there's an email from, an automated email from your inbox, you can drag it to the Sane Later folder, and that trains it to send it there. So
correctly.
Highly recommend.
And you can set up a couple of other folders, so it actually can train a few folders. Yeah, highly recommended.
Yeah. So check out SaneBox shakers. All right, so I'm ready for your answer on community.
Right.
Although I don't remember the question.
Well, you would ask me what communities had influenced me.
Yes.
So a couple answers to that. So one is so I guess before I answer that specifically, I think there's an important sort of overlay to this, which I think is something we've tried to do very hard in Boulder. It's part of the absolute sort of founding ethos of Techstars, and I think it's part of what made Boulder a great community, and of course it exists in other communities as well. But that's this notion of give first, right? So you give before you get, you give without any expectation of getting anything in return, and I think that's what enables great entrepreneurial communities, and I was the benefit of that. To go all the way back, I got my first job, which I went to a small liberal arts college that is not super well known, Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. And so, and it was a very, at the time in particular, it was sort of an academic place, right? And most of my friends became college professors or activist lawyers and things like that. I mean, it was more known for that than for sending people into business or Wall Street and things like that. And so when I decided I wanted to try investment banking and Wall Street, but I didn't have any real network there, and I benefited immediately by a very small but tight-knit community of graduates from my college who were working in banking, and in particular, a couple of people that were working. One was at Solomon Brothers, and one was two were at Morgan Stanley, who just really helped me get my job. And I really didn't like being an investment banker, but it was so critical for my career as just a great foundation for me, and I've got a great network I'm still very close with a lot of the people that I worked with at Morgan Stanley, and I would never have gotten that job but for the fact that I was a part of a community, in this case of Macalester grads, who helped each other out. And so I benefited from that, and I try to help other Macalester students, and when they say, hey, how can I thank you? And the answer is obvious, and it sort of sounds trite, I suppose, but it's like pay it forward, right? You help me by helping the next person, because I helped you in part because I was helped, by the person behind me. Yeah. And I think we all benefit from that, and I think that's so important. So that was sort of the initial one, but of course there have been many, and when I moved to Colorado, I really was welcomed both by the community that was around the company that I worked for, by the broader tech community, and in my case, telecom community, because that's what I came to Colorado originally to do, of people getting together and being very welcoming of me. And I think this is one of the most important aspects of the Boulder entrepreneurial communities. There's lots of things going on, and people really embrace new people moving to town. Yeah. I think that's really important. And when I think about when I was considering getting a job in venture capital, and I reached out to various people I knew that were at least tangential to that community, mostly lawyers, and people took those meetings, right? I mean, the first guy that agreed to meet with me was Kyle Lefkoff, right? Who was a partner at Boulder Ventures at the time. He didn't know who I was. And he and I had a very memorable meeting at the VIX up north. And I don't even know if Kyle remembers this. I haven't mentioned it to him. But, and I'm sure I was one of 100 people he met with that week. But it was really helpful for me. He actually gave me information that was really important. Jack Tankersley from Meritage met with me very early on I was 27 years old. Hey, I kind of think I want to do this venture capital thing. Yeah. They didn't really know me. They had an intro from someone, and so that was important, right? I point out those two people. Brad obviously is on that list. He took me a little longer to get into him because he was very. They were all busy. He was particularly busy at the time, but he was willing to sit down, and the timing ended up working out. They were actually trying to hire someone anyway. But the ability, the serendipity of actually being able to have those conversations is just so important, right? Which is why it's hard, right? I mean, now that I'm on the other side of that, it sort of blows my mind that I was actually able to get some meetings with these folks. And because I know that I can't meet with everyone that reaches out to me,
Yeah.
right? And I try to send emails back or help with advice or whatever I can do. And, you know, I've tried to do community hours through, you know, Denver Startup Week.
Uh-huh.
We do some community hour
See you
stuff. And yeah, absolutely. Sponsored by EFCO, which hopefully we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
You know, so I try to do things like that to allow for a little bit of serendipity. Because that stuff's important. I got involved with the Unreasonable Institute, which is helping train entrepreneurs all over the world. It's been something I've just really loved, and the reason that I met those guys was because I had a community hours session, and Daniel Epstein, who was one of the founders, came and met me and said, "Hey, here's what we're up to." And that was a 15-minute meeting, and it led to, you know, another meeting, and it led to me getting more involved, and then it led to me being on the board, you know, part of the founding board of Unreasonable, which was great.
That's awesome.
So there are a number of stories like that. So I think that, you know, the busier we get, the harder it sometimes gets to allow ourselves to be open to those sort of serendipitous moments. But I think, you know, everyone I know on my side of the table tries as much as we can to figure out ways, even if it's only a few times a year, to sort of say, hey, let's let that serendipity happen and see who shows up.
Yeah, wow, that's great. Yeah, the pay it forward culture is amazing, Shakers. That's all you can really do. You can't control who gives to you, but you can control how much you give to others. So join a community that shares the same mindset, and you'll lift the right. What's the quote? A rising tide lifts all boats. That's it, right?
Yeah, well put.
So so get out there and start giving. Help like-minded entrepreneurs, Shakers, and that's all you can do to kind of lift your community. You can lift the community, but you can't, you know, take from others. You're not going to get anywhere if you try to take first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing is that so much ends up coming back to you, almost always indirectly, and very often in ways that you wouldn't expect when you put yourself out there and give first.
Yeah, and authentic. It's genuine. It's great. It's the only way to go about entrepreneurship, Shakers.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, cool stuff.
These are deep thoughts.
Yeah. So, Seth, what is one action item that the Shakers can take immediately after this video to help them on their journey?
Awesome. I'm going to give you two. First is to sign up for Pledge 1%. And I'm not just saying that sort of in the abstract. That's a great way to put a stake in the ground about this sort of give first mentality. And I think that's meaningful, especially in the Colorado community, but I think even broader outside of that. So that's thing one. Thing two, which is going to sort of sound obvious, but it's to get out there, right? Sometimes entrepreneurs sort of tinker and sit at home, and they get very focused on what they're doing, and they sort of forget that there's this whole world of feedback and people that want to be helpful and that they can bounce their ideas off of. And the best way to do that is to get themselves out there. I mean that literally and figuratively, right? Figuratively get out there by sending their network notes on what they're doing and ask them questions and engage them and try to get feedback from their network, from customers, etc. But also literally get out there, go to events like Denver Startup Week, like New Tech Meetup, you know, other places where they're going to interact with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship is not practiced in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It's so important.
It's not. There it is, Shakers. And Seth isn't the first to say that. Eric Matisek said, get out there and do something today. Anything, even if it's the wrong thing. Telling your network about what you're doing. Even that's a huge step. So get out there, Shakers. So Seth, if we want to find you online, where can we find you?
You can find me at foundergroup.com. You can find me, Seth, at sethlevine.com. And you can find me at Sether on Twitter.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining the Handshakin video series.
Awesome.
Shakers, see you later.